Life Beyond Labels is a Quiet Loud Studios production, proudly featured on Sports E Media. Discover more at quietloudstudios.com. Background music created by Yo Crane. Hello, and welcome to the Life Beyond Labels podcast. I'm your host, Kelsey O'Connor, and I just want to start off each episode by saying thank you. You could have listened to any podcast today, and I'm just so grateful that you chose this one. I'm glad that you're here. And honestly, I just hope that you leave this episode feeling a little bit better than when you started it. And I hope you leave every episode that way. I hope you get some nugget of information, inspiration, or nugget of hope. And I'm just glad you're here. So thank you. In this episode today, I want to start with what does life beyond labels even mean? Give you a condensed version of my personal story, and then talk about what to expect from this podcast moving forward. So in this episode today, I want to start with what does life beyond labels even mean? So to me, life beyond labels means seeing people for more than their external labels, their accomplishments, their roles, and just really prioritizing internal characteristics. I think everybody has something that they feel externally defined by. It could be a job. Maybe you're a teacher or a first responder or a lawyer, and you feel just defined by this work that you do or your productivity. Maybe it's a role in a relationship that you've held for a long time as a parent or a grandparent or a spouse or a friend. Maybe it's a medical diagnosis. It's just anything that you've just felt strongly identified with externally, what people see on the outside. And so we all have something. And I want to preface first that life beyond labels does not mean that labels are all bad. Like labels can really help us identify with our experiences, identify with other people who have been through similar experiences to us. Labels can help us proudly identify with a culture or a group that we're a part of. So labels are not all bad. It's not life without labels and just washing all of that away. Because honestly, too, when it comes to titles or jobs, we should celebrate those things. Maybe you worked really hard for that job. And so those should be celebrated. Life beyond labels is just about changing the way that we see and appreciate ourselves and the people around us by prioritizing the internal stuff. So taking what we see on paper, our first impression, what we see on the outside, taking the time to go beyond that by getting to know someone, who they are, their personality, their story, and then almost flipping how we see and actively describe people based on those internal characteristics before talking about their jobs and their roles. That's where life beyond labels comes in. What is your foundation for your identity if all of those labels were to go away? If you didn't have that job title or any of those titles, who are you? What attitude do you choose to have? How do you treat other people? What are your specific strengths? Because honestly, I believe that every human being has unique strengths and gifts and qualities inside of them. For me personally, my foundation for my identity comes from my faith. My identity is rooted in my faith. It's where I draw my strength. It's where my hope for life comes from. And it makes me who I am. However, there's still accountability that I need to take on a daily basis in deciding the kind of person I want to be. So, yes, I give up control for my life. I have trust and I have faith, but there are still things in my control that are important and make up who I am, what I decide to contribute to the world, and how I step into who I feel like I was created to be. So, I'll share more about this in a bit. But this mindset really came at a time where I just felt like my identity was lost. Like I was so confused about who I was and I needed to rebuild. So I tried to describe people instead of by their labels. I chose 3 different things. First was their attitude. Second was how they treat others. And third is what makes them uniquely beautiful people, their internal strengths and qualities. So, in starting my own introduction to you, in an effort to be a self aware podcast, I will tell you that I am someone with a positive attitude. I choose or try to see the bright side of most things, but I'm also a critical thinker and an overthinker for sure. My goal, honestly, is to just be a kind and reliable person for as many people as possible. I've had such wonderful people in my life who have changed me, and I really want to be that person and that light for other people. And lastly, I've been told that I have a warm, empathetic presence. So that's me beyond my labels. And now I will tell you that I'm a motivational speaker, a former Division 1 athlete. I'm a current grad school social work student back at NC State because I really just want to help people. I want to step into the mental health space and evolve with my content at the same time. And now I guess you could say I'm a podcaster. Yeah, exciting. But before I tell you my story, I do want to preface it's a single story. So like everyone else, this is just one story of several, and I'm giving you a condensed version because in this podcast, we will go into detail about some stories and some anecdotes from my life, and I'm really excited to share that with you. I'm nervous, but I'm really excited. But this particular story is really what's led to everything that I'm doing now. It's why I even started this podcast. So, growing up, I took a lot of pride in how many plates I could spin at one time. I played competitive travel softball starting at a young age, and I loved softball. I could spend hours at a field. And I grew up with this mindset of always feeling like I needed to outwork the person next to me, outwork everyone, all gas, no breaks. I wanted to be the best. But waking up early and staying up late, all of that was my choice. Softball really wasn't my parents' dream. It wasn't anyone else's dream. It was mine. But I knew that softball was never going to be my career. And so I was always encouraged to be balanced, which I really appreciated growing up. So I got to school and I put school first. I got good grades. I got involved in other clubs and volunteering. I had a job. And I was really grateful for these opportunities I had to get involved in different things. And I don't say that to be arrogant. I just say that to give context because at the time, it really was like a badge of honor to me how busy I was, how many responsibilities I could manage at one time. And like, I hate to say that because I wasn't trying to be that person that was like, well, I woke up at 4 a.m. What are you doing today? But it was more so if that was slipped into conversation or if I could show my hard work through my actions, I wanted to do that. I was excited to kind of just have that be what I was known for, being always a hard worker. I was excited to mention it, that kind of thing. In any case, I took that mindset with me into college. And so as soon as I got to NC State, I got recruited to play softball. So I was loving being a student athlete. I loved the busyness of it, lifts, practices, but I also got involved in research. I got involved in volunteering right away in Raleigh. And I just continued to feel like the more productive I was, the more valuable I was. And my worth was tied to my performance and my output. So if you asked me about myself, I probably would have started listing. I was a D1 athlete playing softball. I was an honors student, whatever it was. And then my junior year, I suffered a traumatic brain injury at softball. It was during practice. I was at first base and our shortstop was coming through to turn a double play. But instead of making a lane on either side of the base path, she was coming through. So as I was running to second base, she came straight through and full momentum, knee first, as I was sliding in, just came straight into my face. It was a head, a neck, and a jaw injury all at once. And pretty much immediately, life went from practices, friends, classes, to therapy, doctor's appointments. And unfortunately, I had had more than one concussion before. I had been through this in high school. And so I knew that this injury was completely different. And so I'd been through that, but I had never experienced the cognitive symptoms like this before. And that was the serious and the scary part. So after a few weeks, I decided to medically retire and I stopped playing softball. And this goal that I had spent a majority percentage of my life striving towards was over. I had lost my identity as an athlete, but I knew softball was never going to last forever. I knew that. And I knew it wasn't going to turn into like a real career for me, even if I did make it past college. But even those other parts that I had invested in myself, being a good writer, a good speaker, social work wise, I couldn't lean on those either because I struggled to speak and articulate my thoughts. I struggled to write the same. I was starting to fail my classes and I was struggling with cognitive delays. I was in an enhanced state of confusion, depression, paranoia. I was just a mess. I was a mess. I wasn't even the same daughter or sister because I like to think that I'm a happy person, but I would just cry and yell at my family and then forget what I even said. Unfortunately, my softball program also did not handle it with a lot of kindness, which we will definitely talk about in other episodes of this podcast because honestly, it's it's my podcast. So I'm excited to talk about some real stuff within respectful and reasonable limits. But I've waited 3 years, I've processed, and I find it's time to talk about some things. So I'm excited and nervous to share that with you. But anyways, because of that, I had lost a good portion of my community and a team I thought was my family. And so all at once, everything I knew myself to be was just broken. My identity, my abilities, my personality, everything was just a crumbled mess. And I didn't know how I would recover, when I would recover. And like I mentioned, my identity was rooted in my faith, and I knew that. So my faith was my foundation. But even with that, I was just completely lost because, yes, that was my foundation. But right on top of that, I had been leaning so heavily on all of those other things because that's what I spent my time on every day. That's what my output was, my grades, my performance. It felt like I was meant to be there, and now I wasn't even sure. I didn't know what I was going to do. And so I needed a way to move forward and rebuild who I was going to be on top of that foundation. So I felt loved and I knew I was loved, but I needed something to rebuild. And that's when I kind of realized that I needed a mindset change. So I came up with a resolution and I actually have it on the notes app on my phone. There were two resolutions on the notes app. One just said better texter because already I'm going to be real. I'm a terrible texter and I went completely off the grid during my injury. So it was really good at the time. I'm better now. But the second was when you describe people, describe them for their attributes and how they treat others, not their labels. Describe their characteristics to tell their story. And so, in order to heal the way that I saw myself, I realized that I had to start with how I saw and spoke about other people. Because the people I didn't know as well, I had to get real and recognize that I was still stuck in a competitive mindset in the context of the rest of my life. And no one wants to admit that sometimes they prejudge. And I was on a softball team that was very judgmental. It was a judgmental environment. And I hate to say that, but sometimes it does rub off on you when you spend enough time with people like that. And so I had to zoom out and see kind of how I was seeing some people for their labels first. No one likes to admit that the way they were thinking might need to be challenged, but it really helped me reflect on what I needed to do in order to just be a better person and to just have a little bit more self-compassion, but it was easier to start with other people. And yet the people in my life who I loved or who made an impact on me, my family, my doctors, my professors who helped me finish school, the reason I appreciated them had nothing to do with their titles or their jobs and everything to do with how they made me feel, how they treated me, how they treated other people. So I started actively practicing describing people this way. So when someone wasn't even in a room, I would talk about how they maybe had a quiet strength to them, or they just had this bubbly, infectious personality, or they were approachable or calm in stressful situations. And I started talking about their energy and their heart. I love using my twin brother as an example. I use him all the time. But if I was to describe my brother Michael to you, I would tell you that he's an optimistic guy. He makes people feel welcomed, and he just lights up a room with his humor and his energy. And then I would tell you that he works for ESPN. He's a content researcher for SportsCenter, which I think is so cool. I love sharing that with people. I love hyping him up and celebrating his accomplishments because he earned it. He worked really hard for that. But I describe him by his characteristics first because I want him to always know that regardless of if that job changes, that's how I see him for who he is as a person. And the more I started to practice this, the more my perspective just got brighter and I felt joy. And I really did start to heal the way that I saw myself too. So, all of those labels, student, athlete, underneath those were these characteristics that I built up of resilience, of strength, dedication. So, even when those labels were gone, those characteristics could never be taken away from me. And I could use those characteristics to pivot and still contribute something good and meaningful. I could use my resilience and strength to turn this negative experience into something positive and meaningful. I could use my empathy and my commitment to keep serving others. And for me, that was through my time and volunteering my time. And so my life and my identity changed. But now, on top of my faith foundation, I had a foundation of knowing who I was underneath all of my labels. After about 10 months, I recovered really well. And then about a year later, I decided to apply to speak at NC State's commencement ceremony. I don't know what came over me. I had never spoken publicly before. And just the year before, I was struggling to speak clearly and articulate. But I decided to apply to speak, honestly, for two reasons. One, I thought it would be a really cool way to honor the people who helped me finish my education. My family was all coming, and that was just going to be really special. But I think more so, number two, I wanted to celebrate my classmates who were so resilient. I went to school with the most incredible people who I had seen handle challenges so gracefully. I had people in my class who were raising kids, working jobs, living overseas by themselves. And I wanted to just remind them to celebrate, like, regardless of their plans, the people they were, regardless of their GPA or what plans they had. Like, I found so much joy in celebrating the person I had grown to be throughout college. And I wanted my classmates not to be impressed by me, but to take a moment and be where their feet are and appreciate themselves for who they are who they had grown to be throughout their time. So I applied, and then I was chosen to speak in front of 20,000 people. And I figured going into it, it'll either go great or honestly, maybe it'll end up on Barstool. And that's kind of funny. And I say that as if I didn't care what people thought. That is absolutely not true. I 100% care what people think about me. But I think having just been through a major life stress event, I was just more inclined to take a leap of courage because what's the worst that could happen? And rather than letting fear take over that decision, I was just ready to try. And so I worked myself up into a whatever happens, happens mode. But I was very nervous. Anyways, it went really well. And then about a month later, my friends, my family, they all convinced me to put it on TikTok. So I made my first ever post to TikTok and it went viral. And I always feel so weird giving numbers, but it gives context. It got over 10 million views on TikTok. And then a Facebook group picked it up and it got over 40 million views on Facebook, a couple 100,000 on YouTube, and just went viral. And the best part and the most humbling experience was having people from all over the world message me and share that it had resonated with them. I mean, Jamaica, South Africa, England, Australia, Italy, everywhere. People reaching out and sharing stories of a life altering injury, a life altering loss, a major transition, their identity changes they had gone through in retirement or whatever it may be. I had a message from a firefighter who was struggling with their identity after working 25 years. And so these people reached out to me in real time. Even some of them saying, I used to see myself as just an educator, but now I know I'm creative and caring and I strive to make a difference for young people. Some people tagged their friends and gave people they love affirmations in the comments. It was surreal to see that all these different people, different ages, different walks of life, from different continents, could relate to this feeling of being defined by something external. And that's how Life Beyond Labels was really formed. I started getting invited to speak all over the country to businesses, to colleges and universities, to nonprofits. And again, people of every age group, different abilities, different backgrounds. And that has honestly just been the privilege of my life. Even more so than speaking to hear other people's stories, I just had no idea that speaking would open other people up to share their stories with me. And that's my favorite part of everything. So I hope that even with this podcast, if you hear this and you want to reach out, I love hearing from people and hearing their stories because this podcast, even if it impacts one person, it will have served its purpose. I also want to share that again. I want this to be a self-aware podcast. I know that I'm not the only person in the world who has talked about people being more than their jobs. I am sharing how I interpret this concept, applying stories from my life and this resolution that really helped me heal in this mindset. But I am not all knowing or full of life hack wisdom. I was actually nervous to start this podcast because there is an abundance of advice and content out there. But then I just thought about the fact that I just don't think positive messages can be shared enough or reminded enough by enough people. So you might already do this and know this, but maybe you just needed a reminder today. Or maybe this is the first time that you're really taking the time to consider the way that you're describing people or describing yourself or thinking about things this way. And that's why our stories are so important to share because you might think that no one wants to listen. And yet someone else might be hearing something important for the first time. They might see themselves in you. They might feel inspired or hopeful because of whatever it is that you shared. And that's why I started this podcast, because we all have a one-of-a-kind, unique combination of life experiences, people we've met, lessons we've learned, and that shapes our perspective. And so I just hope to use my unique combination of all of those things to hopefully spread a little bit of good in the world, some light, and I don't know, just have some authentic conversations. Throughout this podcast, I'm just really excited and nervous, like I said, to share some anecdotes from my life with you. And we won't just talk about labels. We're also going to talk about things that are universally experienced, I think, by so many people, whether it's feeling distrust towards people or feeling hurt or learning to trust people again or seeing the good in them, finding confidence, joy, sadness, so many things that we can connect on, even though we all have completely different stories, regardless of our labels. We can connect on those things because we are so much more similar in that way than we are different. And I just think that is such a beautiful thing. And this podcast, it's just going to be a mix of things. And we're also going to have a few guests, which I'm very excited for. And we're going to talk about their stories, who they are beyond their labels. And so I hope you're as excited as I am to hear some of their stories too. But I always want to leave you with some sort of action step or something that is applicable. And so today, I just want to encourage you to start describing people by their attitude, how they treat others, and what makes them a unique, special person. And then slowly start to do the same for yourself. I am so excited, beyond excited. I am just very excited. That was dumb. I'm excited to share this podcast with you. I'm excited to connect as this podcast goes on. And just thank you so much for listening. And I hope that you will join us next time for Life Beyond Labels.